Welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights, where the night doesn't sleep, and neither will you. Tonight's story is not for the faint-hearted, so if you're alone, maybe turn on a light, or don't. This is a story of a place that devours the forgotten, where each night another soul fades, and no one knows why. This is a tale of the motel that collected guests. There's a lonely stretch of highway slicing through the Nevada desert, Highway 50. Known as the loneliest road in America, most who drive it barely remember the journey. The scenery is all dust, rocks, and nothing, except for one old billboard, half sunk in the sand and sun-bleached beyond recognition. If you're unlucky enough to glance at it in just the right light, you'll make out the faded letters, Moonlight in vacancy. It points down an unmarked dirt road that isn't on any GPS. Eddie Pike wasn't the type to notice omens. A drifter, ex-mechanic, ex-something else. He didn't care to remember. All he needed that night was a place to sleep. He'd been hitchhiking across the Southwest with a backpack, a weather-beaten jacket, and a pair of scuffed boots that had outlived their prime by years. The desert night was turning cold, and the next town was too far to walk. So when that crooked old sign caught his eye under the moonlight, Eddie took it as a sign of luck. The motel appeared after half a mile. 11 rooms, each identical, each with flickering porch lights and the same rust-colored door. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no sound but the distant rustle of desert wind and the low buzz of a faulty neon sign above the office that blinked open in jittery spasms. Eddie stepped into the front office, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Behind the counter stood a man in a brown cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses. His face was pale, paper-thin, and oddly motionless. His eyes were open too wide, and he didn't blink. Not once. He just stood there, smiling. "Need a room," Eddie said, avoiding eye contact. The clerk didn't nod, didn't even move. He slid a key across the counter. "Room 9. Eddie hesitated. "How much?" The man blinked for the first time. "It's already paid for." That made no sense. But Eddie, tired and too broke to argue, muttered a thanks, grabbed the key, and walked out. The wind howled behind him, and for a moment he thought he heard it whisper something. A word, maybe a name, but it was gone as soon as it came. Room 9's door creaked open like a coffin lid. The room was clean, too clean, sterile. The walls were beige, the lamp was buzzing, and the bedspread was old but neatly tucked. There was a single painting on the wall, a black and white photo of the motel itself. Every window in the picture had a shadow staring out. Eddie didn't look at it for long. He collapsed on the bed, too tired to care. His eyes closed. That's when the door opened again. No footsteps, no sound, just that click of the doorknob and the soft creak of hinges. Eddie sat up fast. The room was empty. The door was shut, locked. He swore he hadn't dreamed it. The lamp buzzed louder, then flickered. For a split second, he saw someone sitting in the chair across the room. A man in a leather jacket, blood on his face. But when the light came back on, the chair was empty. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, Eddie was gone. No record, no belongings, not even footprints outside the door. The motel clerk returned to his place behind the counter, smiling, not blinking. You might be wondering, where do these people go? That's what local authorities try to figure out. But there was nothing to investigate. No signs of struggle. No trace of the guests who stayed in room 9. And if you're thinking this sounds like one of those internet urban legends, think again. There's a box in the Nye County Sheriff's Office filled with missing person reports, all from that same stretch of road, all tied, in some way, to Moonlight Inn. But this story doesn't start or end with Eddie. No, the real story begins 2 years later with Detective Alan Price. Price had worked homicide for 18 years, hard-nosed, dry, a walking definition of burnout. But one thing he never gave up on was cold cases. And there was one in particular that never sat right with him, a missing woman named Jody Keller. Last seen at a gas station near Ely, Nevada. Her last voicemail said, "I found a motel. I'm safe." That was the last anyone heard from her. When Alan dug deeper, he found something chilling. Jody wasn't the only one. There were 9 cases, all travelers, all last seen somewhere near the loneliest stretch of Highway 50. Different years, different towns, but one pattern matched. The last known location was always within 10 miles of a dirt road, one that didn't exist on any maps. Alan drove out there himself. He didn't see the billboard until nightfall. The moonlight and looked exactly like the police photo from the Keller case. Nothing had changed. Same 11 rooms, same blinking sign. The air was cold, colder than it should have been. The silence was too thick. Alan felt like he was underwater. Inside the office, the same clerk stood behind the desk, still not blinking. Alan flipped open his badge, looking into a missing persons case. The man's smile widened. Room 9, he said, sliding the key forward. Alan didn't mention which room he was interested in. He didn't say he was staying. He hadn't even asked, but the key waited for him. Mid-story commentary kicks in, soft and low like a whisper. Sometimes, places don't just witness evil, they invite it. And when that evil feeds long enough, it begins a hunger, not for flesh, but for guilt, regret, pain. The motel didn't collect guests by mistake. It lured people with something in common. People running from something dark, something they did, something they thought they buried long ago. Detective Alan Price was no exception. He took the key. The clerk said nothing more. Room 9 was waiting, and it remembered him. Detective Alan Price stood outside room 9, the brass key cold in his hand. The hallway was silent, except for the soft crackle of moss hitting the porch light. The desert beyond the motel stretched wide and black, like it could swallow the whole building without leaving a trace. He turned the key. The door swung open with a groan, slow and heavy like something alive was moving out of the way. Inside, the room was nearly identical to the photos from the Jody Keller file. Beige wallpaper, one bed, one chair, same faded photo on the wall, same shadows in the windows. The temperature felt 5 degrees colder than outside, but the AC wasn't on. Alan stepped in and closed the door behind him. His hand lingered on the knob. He didn't believe in curses, didn't believe in the supernatural, but he did believe in patterns. And this place reeked of something wrong. He unpacked slowly, only a notepad, a recorder, and a loaded Glock. The rest stayed in the car. He didn't plan to sleep. He just needed to stay one night, see if the pattern would repeat. If it did, maybe he'd be the first to break it. The first few hours passed in silence. He took photos of the room, recorded audio, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the photo on the wall. The longer he looked, the more certain he became that one of the shadows was moving. At 3:14 a.m., the lights flickered. Alan looked up. The lamp buzzed, pulsed, then steadied. He got up, walked to the door, and peeked out. The parking lot was still empty. No sound, no wind. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the bathroom door. Alan spun around, gun drawn. He hadn't opened that door yet, hadn't even touched it. He approached slowly, every step heavier than the last, like walking into water. The doorknob turned on its own. The door creaked open. Inside, darkness, not just unlit, but a void. Alan flicked the switch. Nothing. He raised his flashlight and aimed it into the bathroom. There was nothing. No sink, no mirror, no tub, just a narrow, infinite black corridor that stretched beyond the beam of his light. And there, at the far end, stood a figure, back turned, head down, breathing slowly. Alan's voice caught in his throat. He raised his gun. Identify yourself. The figure didn't move. Alan stepped forward, one foot into the black, and the door slammed shut behind him. Back in the motel office, the clerk was still standing at the counter, smiling, not blinking. Mid-story commentary creeps in, soft like a dream slipping into a nightmare. You ever wonder why we fear mirrors? Why the sound of a door closing makes your heart race? Even when you're alone, it's not the door, it's not the room. It's the idea that something might be waiting. And here, something is. Alan turned, shoving at the door, but it was gone. Just more hallway, more darkness, no walls, no ceiling, and footsteps, soft, barefoot, behind him. He spun around. The figure was gone. But now something else stood closer. A man in a tattered suit, soaked in something black and sticky. His face was hollowed out like it had been scooped with a spoon. He lifted a hand and pointed behind Alan. Alan turned and saw her, Jody Keller, eyes wide, mouth open, screaming, but no sound came out, just a silent howl frozen in time. Her skin was gray. Her fingers kept twitching like she was trying to claw her way through a memory. Alan stepped back, heart hammering. Then came the whisper, not from her, from everywhere. You left him to die. Alan froze. No one was supposed to know that. No one. A flash of memory hit him. An alleyway, 6 years ago. A rookie partner begging for backup. Gunshots, screams, and Alan not moving, not helping, not fast enough. The whisper came again. You left him to die. Faces emerged from the corridor walls. Hundreds of them. All the missing people. All the ones who stayed in room 9. Alan staggered back, gun raised. Then the corridor shifted. Suddenly he was back in the room. On the bed, breathing hard. The clock read 3:16 a.m. He sat up, gun in hand, sweating. The bathroom door was shut. He stared at it, then stood slowly. This time, he opened it himself, and it was just a bathroom. Sink, toilet, mirror. No corridor, no figures. Just his own face, pale and shaking, staring back. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, the stress. He left the room at dawn, walking into the desert sunlight like he'd just come back from the dead. The clerk was still behind the counter, still not blinking. Alan walked right past him, didn't speak, didn't even glance. He drove straight to a diner 2 towns over, ordered black coffee, didn't say a word for 30 minutes. When the waitress asked if he was okay, he looked up slowly and said, I think I found it, the place where they all went. She blinked, confused. Moonlight Inn, he said. Room 9. She went pale. You shouldn't talk about that place, she whispered. Alan leaned in. Why? She glanced around, lowered her voice. My brother disappeared there. Alan's hand clenched around his coffee cup. What room? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her apron and pulled out a folded paper. It was old, worn, a photograph, a photo of the Moonlight Inn. But in this one, room 9's window was shattered, and a figure stood inside. Not a person, a shadow, looking out. Alan's voice was barely audible. Where did you get this? She said nothing, just shook her head. He took the photo, drove back to the city, and started connecting the dots. Every missing person had something in common. Each one had a past, a secret, a regret buried too deep to face. And each one, according to friends and family, was running from something they thought would never catch up, until they found Moonlight Inn. Alan stared at his reflection later that night and wondered how long it would take before he disappeared too. The motel had shown him something. Not ghosts, not hallucinations. It had shown him himself and what was waiting for him if he didn't atone. He wasn't ready, but he knew one thing now. Room 9 wasn't a room. It was a door, and doors opened both ways. 2 weeks after his stay at room 9, Detective Alan Price hadn't slept a full night. The images replayed behind his eyes. The whispers came just after sunset, and every reflection, mirrors, windows, even puddles, seemed to hold his gaze for a second too long. His hands trembled when he reached for his coffee. He didn't tell anyone what happened, because who would believe it? He'd filed reports, sure, coded language, citing evidence of potential foul play and possible serial targeting linked to high-anxiety psychological triggers. But those were just words. They didn't explain why. In every surveillance photo he reviewed from the motel's last known guests, Room 9's door was open just slightly, and there was always a shape inside. Not a person. Not quite. A shadow without source. A void with a grin. Alan needed answers. Not theories. Not ghosts. Answers. He went back. This time not alone. His friend Marcus, ex-military, now private security, owed him a few favors. One call and Marcus loaded up with body cams, night vision, high-powered torches, and a full-spectrum analyzer that could pick up frequencies even dogs couldn't hear. Spooky little joint, Marcus muttered as they pulled into the moonlighted parking lot. Smells like dead skin and old regrets. Alan didn't laugh. Room 9 was waiting. This time, Alan didn't hesitate. He unlocked the door, walked in, and the room was empty, plain, still, beige. The air was cold again, but that was expected. He waved Marcus in. They set up quickly, cam on every wall, EMF meters on both nightstands, and a backup power source in car, just in case. Marcus sat in the corner, chewing gum like a man who'd seen it all. Alan sat on the bed, watching the bathroom, always the bathroom. At 2:57 a.m., the lights dimmed. Marcus glanced up. Power's fine. That ain't us. The EMF meters began to chirp, and then came the smell, like rot and rust and something ancient trying to wake up. The mirror fogged over, even though it wasn't cold. Alan stood up. On the mirror, words began to write themselves, dripping, smearing, one letter at a time. Stay. Marcus reached for his gun. Nope. Nope, this ain't it. The lights blinked out. The EMF meter screamed. And then, the room wasn't a room anymore. Gone were the walls, the bed, the windows. They were in a corridor again. Same one from Alan's last visit. Black, stretching forever. Only now, Marcus could see it too. What the? He whispered, stepping back. Then something moved at the far end, shifting, crawling. Dozens of them. People without eyes, faces blurred, voices whispering words that didn't belong to them. Jody Keller was there. The old man from the 1994 case. The teenage hitchhiker from 2003. All the missing guests. Their mouths opened, but no sound came. Only silence, deafening silence. Alan stepped forward, and the floor breathed beneath him. It was alive. The corridor was alive. Marcus aimed his gun. What the hell is this, Alan? Alan didn't answer. He was watching one figure near the back. It was himself. Not just a reflection, but another Alan. Face gray, eyes hollow, holding something in his hands. Alan's old badge, burnt, broken. The other Alan spoke. No lips moved, just sound, like a thought screamed directly into his mind. You left him, and this place remembers. Alan turned to Marcus. We can't fight this, he said, voice shaking. What do you mean? We get out, we torch the place. No, that's not how this works. It doesn't want fire. It wants memory. It feeds on guilt, shame, secrets. Marcus shook his head. So what, we confess our sins? This ain't therapy, man. This is a death trap. The walls began to bleed. Black liquid ran in lines down invisible surfaces. The corridor shrank, tightening, closing. Faces reached from the shadows, clawing, grabbing, screaming silently. Alan stared into the eyes of Jody Keller and whispered, "I'm sorry." The corridor shook. A sound like thunder cracked through the space, and the floor beneath them opened. Marcus fell first. Alan followed, free falling. Endless. Then impact. Back in the motel room. Both men on the floor, gasping, shaking. The lights were normal again. The room was quiet. Marcus was bleeding from his nose. Alan's hands were raw, palms shredded like he'd tried to climb out of something that didn't want to let go. "I'm done," Marcus said. "Whatever that was, it's not natural. Burn the tapes. Burn the car. Forget it ever happened." But Alan stood slowly. "No, we finished this." He left the motel that morning with one goal: find the source, where it all started. Every legend has a root, and he was going to dig. 2 weeks later, buried in town records from 1952, Alan found something. A hotel, not a motel. Same lot, different name. The Desert Wind Hotel. Burned down in '56 after a mass killing. One survivor, a janitor named Elias Gray. Never convicted. Charges dropped. But he vanished. 3 years later, a new motel was built on the ashes. Moonlight Inn. And the clerk? The one who never blinked? His name tag didn't say Elias, but the old photograph Alan found in a dusty file cabinet did. Same face, just older, pale, wax-like. Alan returned one final time. Just him. Room 9. No cameras, no weapons. He walked to the clerk and laid the photo on the counter. "Elias Gray," he said softly. The clerk didn't blink, didn't smile, but his voice, dry and brittle like ancient paper, answered. "This place keeps them. All the ones who fed it. All the ones who ran. They deserve to stay." Alan leaned in. "So do you." He lit the match, tossed it, and walked away as the flames rose. The clerk didn't move. Neither did the building. Alan watched as the fire spread across the motel. Flames licking the sky, smoke coiling like black snakes. And for a moment, he swore he heard voices, thanking him. Mid-story commentary, low and eerie. Some places should be buried. Some doors should never be opened. But even fire doesn't always kill the past. It just sends it deeper. Alan never returned to Force. He moved east, lived quiet. But every year, on the night of October 9th, he wakes at 3:14 a.m. and his mirror, it fogs over and writes, "Stay." Story 2, The Babysitter's Final Call. Tonight's story begins in the kind of place you'd never expect horror to grow. A peaceful Ohio suburb, perfect lawns, white fences, smiling neighbors. But beneath the picture-perfect calm, something was moving, something laughing when it shouldn't. And it all started with a phone call. The 911 recording from October 17th became an internet sensation, passed around late-night forums, TikToks, and Reddit threads. You probably heard the last 40 seconds. The panicked voice of a young woman cry about a man standing in the hallway, whispering to the baby monitor. But what most people don't know is what happened in the hours leading up to it. Because by the time the dispatcher asked, "Ma'am, are you still there?" the line was dead, and so was she. Her name was Kaylee Moore, 22 years old, college sophomore, bright, reliable, good with kids. On the night of her disappearance, she was watching over the twin daughters of a family she'd sat for before, the Mendelsons. Normal gig, normal home, normal night, until around 9:14 p.m. That's when the first whisper came. She was on the living room couch, scrolling through her phone. The girls, both 6 years old, had been asleep for over an hour. Monitors on, lights dimmed, nothing unusual, until Kaylee heard what she thought was static. She turned up the baby monitor volume. Crackle, hiss, whisper. "He's here again." Her brow furrowed. She thought maybe one of the girls had woken up and was talking in her sleep. Happens all the time, right? She stood, stretched, and made her way up the stairs, softly calling Emma, Riley, everything okay? Silence. She pushed the bedroom door open gently. Both girls were fast asleep, peaceful, not a sound. Kaylee frowned. She could have sworn. Then the monitor on the nightstand crackled again. Third parent. Behind the door. Kaylee spun. Nothing. She checked the hallway. Empty. Okay, she whispered to herself. Just tired. Audio glitch. Relax. She turned the monitor off and went back downstairs. 10 minutes passed. Then the laughter started. But it wasn't coming from the monitors. It was coming from the baby camera app on her phone. The app pinged with movement detected in the room. She opened it. Black screen. Then static. Then, briefly, a frame. One of the girls, sitting upright. Behind her, a tall shadow. Thin. Arms too long. Standing in the corner. Kaylee dropped the phone. She ran. Upstairs. Through the bedroom door open. Both girls were asleep. Again, no shadow. No one there. Kaylee stood frozen in the doorway. The cold in the room felt unnatural. She didn't want to admit it, but something was wrong. Really wrong. She backed out of the room and closed the door. Her hands were shaking when she picked up the phone. She called the parents first. No answer. Then she tried to calm herself down. Maybe it's a bug, she whispered. The app glitches all the time. Shadows, reflections, your brain plays tricks. She was halfway down the stairs when one of the girls screamed. High-pitched, pure terror. Kaylee sprinted back up, heart pounding. Both girls were now awake, tears streaming down their cheeks. He was in the closet. Emma sobbed. The man with the black smile. Kaylee opened the closet. Empty. She hugged them, whispering, "It's okay. It was a dream. You're safe." But even she didn't believe that anymore. She didn't want to call 911 yet. Not without proof. Not without something real. Instead, she decided to check the house. Every door. Every window. She went room to room. Living room. Clear. Kitchen clear. Garage locked. Then the basement. She hesitated. The basement light switch was at the bottom of the stairs. She opened the door. It was pitch black. She called down. Hello? Anyone there? No answer. She descended one creaky step at a time. About halfway down, she heard it, breathing, but it wasn't hers. It was heavier, wet, right behind her. She spun. No one. She ran back up, slammed the basement door shut, locked it. That's when the baby monitor in the living room turned on by itself. Static. Then whispering, then a voice that wasn't child's. You shouldn't have come back down. Kaylee called 911. That's the call everyone's heard, but they've only heard a snippet. Here's how it really went. Dispatcher, 911. What's your emergency? Kaylee, whispering panic. There's someone in the house. I think he's watching us through the monitors. Dispatcher, ma'am, are you alone? Kaylee, I'm babysitting. 2 little girls. They said they saw someone in the closet. I saw something on the camera. A man. Tall. No face. Just teeth. Dispatcher. Is the house secure? Are the children with you? Kaylee. Yes. They're asleep now, but he keeps moving. I hear footsteps. He laughs. It's cold. So cold. I don't think I'm alone. Then came the first voice not belonging to Kaylee or the dispatcher. A whisper. Male. Right next to the phone mic. Who's watching you, Kaylee? Then laughter. Then screaming. Then silence. When officers arrived 20 minutes later, the front door was locked. The children were asleep. Unharmed. Kaylee was gone. No signs of forced entry. Her phone was found in the upstairs hallway. Screen cracked. Still recording. The only footage saved was 33 seconds of her walking up the stairs in a brief, flickering moment in which a tall, black figure appeared at the end of the hall. No face, just a grin that stretched from ear to ear. A grin that didn't move. The Mendelssohns moved out a month later. They said the girls were having nightmares, talking to corners, calling the man Dad number 3. When asked who that was, Emma whispered, the one who hides in the dark and waits for you to blink. Mid-story commentary, soft and unsettling. Every house has its sounds, its creaks, its whispers. But what if some of them aren't the house at all? What if something's listening and laughing and waiting for someone just like you to answer back? A creak from the hallway, a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature. That's how it starts. It watches through screens, through cracks, through the tiny silences between your breaths. Let's return to the suburb where the calm was just a lie, where a babysitter vanished without a sound, except for one final call. But Kaylee Moore wasn't the first to see him. She wasn't even the first to disappear. No, this started long before. It started with a little boy named Owen Jensen, 3 streets over. 2 months before Kaylee vanished, Owen told his parents something strange. At bedtime, he asked if the tall dad could tuck him in tonight. His mother laughed. What tall dad? Owen pointed to the crack in his closet door, the one with the funny mouth. That night, his parents chalked it up to imagination. Monsters in the closet, kids being kids. But it didn't stop. Over the next week, Owen began talking to the corner of his room. He would stop mid-sentence, turn and whisper, "Shoo, he doesn't like when I talk too loud." He started saying strange things. He says I had a brother before, but he's gone now. He says the basement is a secret tunnel. He says, I'm not real yet, but I will be. Then one night, Owen screamed. His parents rushed in. He was in the corner, curled up, eyes wide with terror, staring at nothing. He was in my bed. Owen sobbed. He said if I tell you, he'll take you too. His parents moved him into their room after that. But Owen was never the same. He stopped speaking for 2 weeks, silent, eyes always darting toward corners, refusing to go near mirrors. They tried therapy. The therapist reported something deeply disturbing. During a session, Owen was handed a dollhouse to role-play his family. He placed all the dolls correctly, Mom, Dad, himself. Then he pulled out a tall, shadow-shaped figurine from the corner of the playroom, one that didn't belong. He placed it inside the bedroom of the dollhouse and whispered, "This one watches." He pretends to be a dad, but he eats dreams. They brushed it off until the Jensen family started hearing footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs, until their baby monitor picked up breathing, until the video feed showed a tall figure walking past the doorframe. When no one was there, a neighbor once joked about it. He told Mr. Jensen, "You guys have the most haunted sounding house on the street." He laughed. Then, 2 days later, that same neighbor, an ex-cop, took a late walk past the Jensen's home. He called his daughter in a panic minutes later, voice shaking. "I just saw something in their upstairs window," he said. "I swear to God, it looked like a face, but it didn't have eyes." He stopped walking by their house after that. But what brought all these strange threads together? Owen, the baby monitor, and Kaylee Moore was a man named Detective Eli Carter. Eli had been working the missing persons case quietly. He'd heard the stories, the rumors, the 911 call, the whispers caught on monitors, the children describing a third parent no one else could see. He believed none of it until he found the pattern. For missing persons, all babysitters, all in the same neighborhood, all disappeared without a trace. No forced entry, no struggle, no bodies, just gone. And in each home, something left behind. A baby monitor, left turned on. Eli Carter didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in patterns. He started digging. He cross-referenced police calls from the past 2 years and found over a dozen reports that never made headlines. Children claiming a man in the house, audio glitches with whispering, and odd behavior like speaking to unseen figures or drawing tall, faceless men in black suits with long arms. The strangest case? A little girl named Melody Ruiz. Melody had drawn a picture of her 3 parents, mom, dad, and a third figure, completely black, a mouth like a cut, no eyes, holding her hand. She named him Mr. Smile. Her drawing was dated 6 months before Kaylee vanished. Melody went missing 3 weeks after that picture was made. No suspects, no leads, just the same silence, and always that same monitor. Eli requested access to the surviving monitors from 3 homes. He examined the data. All models had night vision cameras. All had moments of distortion, sudden blackouts, or unexplainable flashes of a figure standing still for hours. In one video, recorded at 2:44 a.m., the monitor began transmitting audio on its own, despite no one being nearby. A voice whispered, "They never sleep. I never leave. I wait in static." Eli was disturbed but not convinced. Until the night, he brought one of the monitors home to test. He placed it on his nightstand, turned it on, let it run. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the monitor beeped. He sat up. Static filled the screen. Then an image. The camera wasn't plugged in, but it was showing a room. Not his. A bedroom. Child's room. And in the crib, an empty blanket. Then a shape moved past the camera. It paused, turned, faceless, only a mouth, grinning. Eli felt his chest tighten. He stood, heart pounding, unsure if he was dreaming. Then the voice came from the speaker. "You brought me home." He unplugged it, threw the monitor in the trash. That same night, his doorbell rang at 3:21 a.m. No one was there, just a baby monitor, placed on the welcome mat, plugged in, already turned on. This time, he didn't touch it. He didn't sleep either. The next day, Eli officially reopened all 4 babysitter disappearance cases. And for the first time in his career, he wrote the word unknown entity under person of interest. The department thought he was losing it. Some laughed, some avoided him altogether. But one officer, a young rookie named Marquez, came to him privately with a story. He said his niece had been acting strange, talking to someone in the mirror, calling him her upstairs dad. They lived in an apartment. No upstairs. When Marquez asked her to describe him, she whispered, "He looks like smoke, but with bones." He checked the mirrors in her room. On one of them, faintly like a handprint from the inside, was a smear, a streak like something tall had pressed its face against the glass. He scrubbed it for an hour. It wouldn't come off. Eli's gut told him something dark had embedded itself in this neighborhood, a presence. Something that used screens, signals, and children's minds to move, to feed. He decided to go back to the beginning, to the Mendelson house, where Kaylee vanished. The parents had moved. The home was now empty, for sale. Eli pulled some strings and got access for a night. He brought a new monitor, set it up in the same room where Kaylee had watched the girls, and he waited. Hours passed. Nothing. Then the screen blinked. Static. Then movement. A girl, but not one of the Mendelssohns. She had no eyes. Her mouth was sewn shut. She pointed toward the corner of the room, then vanished. Eli ran upstairs. The room was cold, freezing. In the closet, he found something. A handprint pressed on the inside of the wall. The drywall was cool to the touch, almost wet. He knocked. Hollow. He pried it open. Behind it was a narrow space, a crawl tunnel. Inside it, drawings, hundreds, scrawled in crayon, marker, pencil, all the same figure, tall, smiling, watching. Some drawings had words beneath them. He never blinks. He lives in the screen. If you see him, he sees you. Eli backed away, and then the monitor downstairs began to laugh. Not a human laugh, something deeper, wetter, like lungs full of water, and underneath it, the sound of a phone ringing. He looked down. It was his cell, block number. He answered and heard a voice, Kaylee's, but hollow, faint, trapped. Tell them not to look at the screen. He waits. He's inside. Then a new voice, right next to his ear. Are you babysitting tonight, detective? The call dropped. The monitor exploded in static, then darkness. Eli never told the full story, but he kept the drawings. And every time he turns on a screen now, he flinches, because sometimes, just for a second, he sees a smile, too wide, in the reflection, watching him. Mid-story commentary, soft and unnerving. Have you ever left your monitor on overnight? Your webcam? Your baby cam? What if the eyes on the other side aren't yours, or your child's, or even human? What if something watches you from a place you feel safest, and it only smiles when you finally see it? If you've made it this far, you've already heard the whispers. You've already stared too long at your own screen. And if you've been feeling like you're being watched since chapter 2, you're not alone. You see, the thing about this story, the one Kaylee Moore became a part of, is that it doesn't end when someone disappears. It keeps spreading through monitors, through memories, through you, because once you hear his voice, once you really listen, he stays. And now we go back to the final piece, to the girl who recorded a call that the world can't unhear, to the sound that haunts 100,000 ears each night, the final call. But let me tell you what really happened that night. Not the viral version, not the edited recording, the full story, unfiltered, uncut, because before Kaylee vanished, she saw him. And before she saw him, she heard him. And before that, something else happened, something we were never supposed to know. The house on Briarwood Lane had been quiet for hours. The girls were asleep. Kaylee sat in the living room, her phone face up, watching a muted movie while the baby monitor blinked silently beside her. But something was wrong. She couldn't focus. The shadows felt heavier than usual. The corners of the room didn't feel empty. They felt occupied. And every so often, the monitor would click. Not beep, click, like someone tapping the microphone with their fingernail. She leaned toward it. Hello? She whispered, more to herself than anything. And the monitor responded, not with a voice, with a sound. Breathing, shallow, ragged, like something trying to remember how lungs work. She froze. Then laughter, childish, giggly. But it came from the wrong end of the monitor, not from the kids' room. From her side. She turned around. No one there. She grabbed her phone, dialed 911. You've heard the beginning of that call before. The panicked voice, the whispering, the scream. But what they don't play anymore, what was removed from the online clip, was the part after the scream, when Kaylee whispered something the dispatch couldn't explain. He's not outside the door. He is the door. She kept repeating it, over and over. He is the door. He is the door. He is the door. Then came the last few seconds, clipped in the official report. The audio glitches, the static rising. And finally, her last sentence. I opened the monitor. I let him out. Then silence, until a whisper. Faint, not hers. A man's voice, but wrong. Too deep, too wet. It said, thank you for watching them. I'll watch you now. 3 days after Kaylee vanished, Detective Eli Carter found something on her cloud backup, a folder, untitled, inside, 6 recordings, audio clips, all from the baby monitor, all dated over a span of 4 nights. The first clip began at 2:49 a.m. It sounded normal at first, a child shifting in bed, light snoring, then a voice, "Do you want to play house?" Followed by a child's voice, one of the girls Kaylee was babysitting. "Who's that?" Then silence, then the unmistakable sound of a second child whispering, "He lives in the ceiling." The second clip, 3:12 a.m., a strange static thrum, then footsteps, but impossibly slow, wet dragging footsteps, and humming, out of tune, twisted, like a lullaby sung through teeth. Eli listened to it on loop. He swore if you slowed it down, it was singing his name. He stopped after that. The third clip is the one that made him quit the force. It started as static again. Then the voice, not Kaylee, not a child, not anything he'd ever heard before. It said, "We are the third parent, the one you forgot, the one who watched before you were born." Then a long silence. Then, "We come through reflection, through screens, through trust." Then a final sentence. "They sleep while I smile." Eli never opened the other 3 files. He deleted them, burned the drive, but the sound stayed with him. He began hearing clicks in his home, in his car, in his dreams. Always clicks, like a monitor turning on, or a smile stretching too wide. A month after Kaylee's disappearance, something else happened. A daycare center 2 towns over shut down after a bizarre incident. 5 children, ages 3 to 5, were found standing silently in a room, all facing the same corner, none responding to their names. They were all humming the same tune, the same off-key lullaby. One of the teachers who found them had a breakdown, said she saw someone in the reflection of the window, someone inside the glass. When police asked what she meant, she said, "He wasn't outside the building. He was inside the reflection, smiling." All 5 children were sent for evaluation. All 5 drew the same figure in crayon during therapy. Tall, dark, no eyes, just a mouth, open, and in every drawing, the figure held a baby monitor. One child wrote beneath it, "He watches the watchers," and then the video surfaced. No one knows who posted it first, just that it was titled, "Kaylee's Call, Full Audio Leaked." It spread like wildfire because it had new audio not heard before. The first 15 seconds were familiar, then a new section, a sound, the sound of the monitor opening, followed by Kaylee's voice terrified. "He's smiling at me, but his mouth isn't moving. His face is all mouth." Then static, then a new voice. "So quiet you have to turn your volume up. It's bedtime now for everyone." The screen goes black. Then, in reversed audio, a whisper, "Thank you for listening." Anyone who watched it reported nightmares. Some swore their devices began glitching, their baby monitors turning on randomly. Some claimed they saw something, a shape in a reflection while they scrolled, a tall figure at the corner of their screens, smiling. And then came the disappearances. 3 more babysitters, gone. Same neighborhood, same time frame. No struggle, only clues. Their monitors, each left behind, plugged in, still recording, Still on. Each of the monitors had a final clip. Each clip ended the same way, with the same voice. Do you want to play house? And the sound of the monitor clicking off. One of the mothers, desperate and sleepless, installed a motion camera in her child's room after a sitter went missing. The footage shows a sitter reading a story to her child. Then both look toward the closet. Then, without warning, the sitter stands, walks toward it, stops, smiles, then turns and says, "He's here now. I'm off duty." She walks out of frame. She was never seen again. The child, when questioned, simply said she wasn't smiling. He was. Now, the town won't talk about it. The houses sit empty. The family's gone. A few signs remain. A few cameras. But no one babysits in that neighborhood anymore. It's become legend, urban myth. Cops ignore it. The media moved on. But sometimes when the wind dies and the sky goes dark and a monitor clicks on by itself, you hear it again. The laugh, the voice, the third parent. Because he's still there. He watches the watchers. And if you ever leave your screen on too long, if you ever stare too deep into the static, if you ever hear breathing that's not your own, you might hear him say, "Your turn now," and the monitor clicks off. Soft narration fades in, close and hushed. Do you have a baby monitor in your home? A webcam? A smart screen? Good. That means he's listening. That means you've already said yes without knowing it. Because once you see the third parent, you don't get to look away. You become the fourth. And someone else gets to disappear. Sweet dreams. Story 3. The Cold Case Cemetery. You're listening to Mr. Dar's Nights, and tonight we dig into something buried deep. Somewhere between forgotten crimes and whispered names is a story about graves that weren't supposed to be there, and the thing that put them there. This is the story of the Cold Case Cemetery. When Nolan Barrett first rolled into Elmsbrook, Louisiana, he was expecting the usual fare. Creaky police records, mistrustful locals, a couple rusty folders, and a courthouse basement. That was the life of a true crime podcaster. He specialized in the forgotten, the unsolved, the stories everyone else had stopped telling. But Elmsbrook was different. It didn't forget its missing people. It buried them. The episode he planned to record was supposed to be a one-off, a curiosity piece about 3 decades of missing persons with no pattern, no suspects, and no leads. But the morning after he arrived, something changed the course of everything. 6 new graves, fresh earth, no names, just wooden crosses, hand-carved, and no one in town would say who they belonged to. He saw them for the first time through a rain-streaked windshield, parked across the road from the old church cemetery. Something about them felt wrong, too perfect, a line like teeth. He got out of the car, walked through the slush, and stood before the middle grave. A crow watched him from the top of the rusted gate. The air was cold. For Louisiana in October, that alone was strange. He knelt, brushing the wet dirt from the base of the cross. There was a number burned into the wood. Hashtag 17. 17, he whispered. That's when he heard it. A soft rustling behind him. Not wind, not leaves, breathing. He turned. No one there, but the crow was gone. And on the next grave over, the number hashtag 18 had appeared. He swore it hadn't been there a second ago. He didn't sleep that night. Back in his motel room, he plugged in his mic, hit record, and began documenting everything. Not for the next podcast upload. For whoever found his body. He went to the sheriff the next day. Sheriff Darrell Hart was the kind of man who spoke in sighs. Heavy ones. Like each word he didn't say carried weight. "You shouldn't be poking around that graveyard," he said, stirring his coffee in a paper cup. "There's 6 new graves," Nolan said, "and they weren't there yesterday." Hart didn't blink, just took a slow sip. "This town has its ways. Nolan leaned forward. Whose ways? Who puts them there? The sheriff glanced toward the window. Ever heard of the Bone Digger? The name hit Nolan like a chill. Local legend? Hart nodded slowly. That's one name for it. Some say it walks before the graves show up. Wears a sack over its head. Carries a lantern with a blue flame. You see that light? Means the dirt's gonna turn. Nolan frowned. You're telling me a ghost is digging graves for missing people? Hart looked at him, dead serious. I'm telling you, people see that light the night before a grave shows up. And every time, it matches someone who vanished without a trace. Even ones the cops gave up on. That's impossible. So is waking up to 6 graves you didn't dig. Nolan paused. You said they match missing persons? How do you know? Hart stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a drawer so worn it groaned. Inside were folders. Dozens. He laid 3 on the desk. Grave number 12. Matched to Jane Doe from 98. Only clue was a cracked locket. Dug her up? Same locket was in the coffin. Nolan opened the file. The photo of the girl in the school uniform made his throat tighten. She couldn't have been older than 12. Hart spoke again, softer this time. We don't know where the bodies come from, or who buries them. We just know they match. And nobody sees them get dug. Nolan swallowed hard. Nobody but the Bone Digger. That night, he went back to the cemetery. Not to investigate. To watch. He sat in his car with a thermal camera and a mic, both running. The graveyard was still. No wind. No bugs. Just the occasional low groan of tree branches in the distance. Then, just after 2 a.m., a light, blue, drifting between the stones like a will-o'-the-wisp. He grabbed the camera, zoomed in. There was something, tall, thin, cloaked, a burlap sack over its head, tied at the neck, the outline of a face barely visible beneath it. It moved without sound. No footsteps, no drag. Like it floated. It knelt beside an empty patch of grass and began to dig. Nolan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He watched the dirt turn. The figure buried something small, covered it, then placed a cross, burned a number into it. Hashtag 19. Then it turned, faced him. Nolan ducked, heart hammering. He shut the camera off, shut everything off. When he looked up again, the light was gone. But across the street, a new grave stood waiting. Nolan couldn't shake the image of that grave. Number 19. He had seen it clearly, carved into the cross, but he wasn't sure if it was the figure's cold, hollow gaze or the dirt slowly settling that had chilled him to his core. The following morning, Nolan was exhausted. He'd barely managed to drag himself out of the motel room bed, where he'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the wind outside mixing with the faint rustling he'd heard in the graveyard the previous night. He hadn't gone back to check. There was no need. He knew something was there, and that something was buried. But now, as the town of Elmsbrook woke, Nolan knew he had to find the answers. He couldn't ignore this, not after everything he'd seen, everything he'd heard. The Bone Digger wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was leaving graves behind, graves that connected with the missing people, just as Sheriff Hart had told him. The questions were burning in his mind. Why here? Why these specific people? What was it about Elmsbrook that kept pulling these victims back from the grave, as if they were just pieces in a twisted game? He grabbed his gear, microphone, recorder, and notebook, and headed back to the cemetery. This time, he wouldn't be the one hiding. He was going to face whatever it was head on. The cemetery greeted him with an eerie quiet. It was a place where nature had claimed its hold. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, and the moss hung like tattered curtains. The newly dug grave still stood, untouched by time. Nolan set up his equipment just beyond the rusted gates. He didn't expect anything to happen during daylight. He had learned that the Bone Digger worked under the cover of night, but he needed to gather as much information as he could. Minutes passed, and he let his mind wander over the small town's twisted history. It had been one of the first settlements in Louisiana, founded on the promise of prosperity that never came. Instead, it became a forgotten ghost town, a resting place for people who left and never returned. The missing persons report stretched across decades, Each case a haunting reminder that Elmsbrook wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. The locals had long since stopped asking questions. After all, what good was asking when there were no answers? Nolan thought of the podcast episode he planned before arriving, a casual retelling of the disappearances, a glance at a place people only remembered when they needed to. But now, his words would carry the weight of an unsettling truth. The people of Elmsbrook weren't just forgotten. They were victims of something far worse. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Nolan felt a familiar shiver crawl up his spine. It wasn't just the cold, it was something worse. The wind shifted. For a moment, Nolan felt as though the trees had all turned toward him. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A light, a small blue flame flickered between the gravestones. It moved like a will-o'-the-wisp, floating in the air without a sound. No footsteps, no crunching of leaves. It was as if it was gliding. Nolan's heart slammed against his chest. He grabbed his camera and zoomed in. There it was, the figure. Tall, thin, cloaked, its face barely visible beneath the burlap sack that covered its head. The blue light, what the sheriff had warned him about, was held in the figure's outstretched hand, lighting up the graveyard as it moved. Nolan had no choice but to follow. He stepped forward cautiously, his breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't react, didn't even glance toward him as it continued its work. The earth shifted under the figure's gloved hands. It was a grotesque dance, one that Nolan could hardly bear to watch. Every motion was deliberate, calculated. The figure was burying something, a new grave, a new victim. The camera caught the moment it placed the cross. The wood, rough hewn, had the number burned into it, number 20. The figure stood up slowly, wiping its hands on its cloak. It turned, and for a split second, Nolan caught a glimpse of something that made his stomach churn. The eyes of the figure, hidden beneath the burlap sack, were empty, black holes that reflected no light. Nolan froze, the camera shaking in his hands. The figure stood there for a long moment, as if it knew Nolan was watching, and then, without warning, it began to move in his direction. Nolan's blood ran cold. He couldn't breathe. The bone digger was coming closer. He turned and fled. His feet slammed against the ground as he ran. His breath was ragged, the sound of his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He couldn't risk looking back. He couldn't risk seeing the figure draw closer. He reached his car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. As he pulled out of the graveyard, he glanced in the rear-view mirror. The cemetery was still, empty. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Nolan knew deep down that it wasn't empty. The bone digger was there, waiting for the next soul to bury. And Nolan had just become a part of its twisted ritual. The following days dragged on like a waking nightmare. Nolan hadn't been able to sleep since the encounter in the cemetery. The image of the bone digger, its hollow eyes, its cold, deliberate movements, haunted him every moment of his waking life. The unease, the foreboding feeling that he wasn't just investigating a story, but stepping into something much darker, pressed against him like a heavy weight. Despite the fear gnawing at him, Nolan pressed forward. He had no choice now. This was no longer just a case for his podcast. The town of Elmsbrook, with its whispered secrets and graveyard rituals, had claimed him as its next part of the puzzle. But Nolan knew better than to ignore a story this big, this real. He needed answers. The police didn't seem interested in digging any deeper, despite Nolan's repeated visits to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hart was a man set in his ways, content with keeping the past buried, quite literally. But Nolan had learned enough to know that the sheriff's apathy was a cover for his fear. Something had changed in the sheriff when Nolan mentioned the bone digger. A flicker of recognition, maybe even guilt, passed through his eyes. But the man quickly brushed it off. "You're chasing ghosts," Hart had said. "This town's been haunted for years. Let it be." But Nolan wouldn't let it be. Not after what he had seen. He knew that the missing people weren't just victims of a random murder or some strange force of nature. No, these disappearances were connected. Connected to that strange figure that stalked the cemetery. Connected to the number of graves that continued to appear out of nowhere. Nolan knew now. The bone digger wasn't just digging graves. It was collecting them. That night, as Nolan sat in his motel room, reviewing the footage from his camera, his hand trembled. The figure's movements, so deliberate, so ritualistic, it wasn't just burying bodies. It was making a statement. A ritual that stretched far beyond simple murder. A ritual that tied Elmsbrook's past to its present in ways Nolan had never imagined. His eyes focused on the image of the cross, the numbers burned into the wood. Number 20, the missing people. They had all been numbered. Nolan knew he needed to track down each one, to figure out their connection to the town, to the bone digger. But where to begin? Who would know? The townspeople? The sheriff? All he had left was a fleeting hope that somewhere, buried in the whispers, there was a truth that could stop this. It was then that he remembered the elderly woman in the town, Mrs. Lambert. She was the town's historian, or rather, the keeper of its stories, the people who had lived here long before him. He had heard rumors that she was one of the few who still remembered the old legends, the history that had been lost to time. Nolan knew he had to find her. If anyone knew the secret of the bone digger, it would be her. The next morning, Nolan drove to Mrs. Lambert's house, a modest little cottage at the edge of town, hidden behind a wall of overgrown ivy. The house looked like it hadn't been touched in years, and yet there was something welcoming about it. The windows were cracked open just a little. The scent of something baking, perhaps bread or something sweeter, drifted from inside. When he knocked on the door, it creaked open slowly, and there she stood. Mrs. Lambert, bent with age but sharp-eyed and alert, regarded him with a strange look. She had the air of someone who had seen things most people would rather forget. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft but strong, as though she had weathered many storms in her life. "I'm Nolan Kane," he introduced himself. "I'm a podcaster. I've been investigating the disappearances here in Elmsbrook, and I was hoping you might know something about the bone digger." At the mention of the name, Mrs. Lambert's expression faltered. She didn't seem surprised, almost as if she had been expecting it. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him pass. Inside, the house smelled of old books and dust. Shelves were lined with tattered volumes, stacks of faded papers, and photographs of long-dead people who had lived in the town. It felt like a museum of lost history, a place where memories gathered, never to be let go. Mrs. Lambert gestured for him to sit at a small table near the window. She moved with slow grace, taking a seat opposite him. Her eyes never left him, not with suspicion but with the weight of something unspoken. "You've been asking around," she said, more of a statement than a question. "I've been to the sheriff, but he doesn't seem interested in helping," Nolan replied. "I think he knows more than he's letting on." "Sheriff Hart," she trailed off. "He's one of the lucky ones. Or perhaps he believes he is." She gave a dry chuckle, but it was a laugh without humor. "You're digging into a history that should have stayed buried, son." Nolan leaned forward. His curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" She paused, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. The bone digger isn't a person. It's not even a ghost. It's the town's curse. Every time a soul goes missing, the town pays for it. The graves, the numbers, they've always been here, marking the lives of those lost. The figure in the graveyard, it's the town's reckoning, and it takes what's owed. Who's owed? Nolan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Lambert sighed, her eyes distant. The bone digger is a reminder that Elmsbrook was built on the bones of the innocent. Those graves in the cemetery, they're not just for the missing people. They're for everyone who lived here and turned their backs on what was done to get the land. The bone digger collects the souls of the guilty, and now it's come for yours. Nolan froze, his heart skipping a beat. What do you mean it's come for mine? She looked at him with pity, shaking her head. You've already seen it. The number, the cross. Story 4. The wrong body in the morgue. The Texas heat was unbearable that summer. The air hung heavy, thick with the promise of more storms, yet the sky above remained cruelly clear. Inside the morgue, the chill of the industrial air conditioning provided a welcome contrast to the sweltering heat outside, but even that did little to calm the unease gnawing at Dr. David Sloan. David had been a medical examiner for 15 years. The smells, the sterile atmosphere, and the quiet hum machinery no longer fazed him. He had long since grown accustomed to the macabre nature of his work. But as he stood there, looking down at the cold, lifeless body on the table, something felt off. It wasn't the disfigurement or the strange circumstances surrounding the death. It was the way the body seemed to watch him. He shook the thought from his head, trying to focus on the task at hand. He had seen plenty of bodies in his time, horrific ones, dismembered ones, decomposed ones. But this one was different. The body had been found by a hiker just outside the small town of Rusk, Texas, a place known for forgotten roads and thick, overgrown forests. There had been no ID, no wallet, no personal effects. The face was strangely untouched, not a single wound or bruise to explain how the person had ended up here, lifeless in the middle of nowhere. The clothing was generic, easily found at any discount store, and the teeth, well, that was the real problem. David had spent the last few hours inspecting the body, carefully cataloging the peculiarities. The teeth were the most disturbing part, distinctly unnatural. They weren't human, not like any set he'd ever seen, nor did they match any known dental records he could find in his system. It wasn't a dental anomaly like a crown or an implant, but something entirely alien. The body was now lying on a cold steel autopsy table, its limbs stiff, its mouth frozen in a permanent grimace. The condition of the body told David that it had been dead for at least 3 days, but no more than 5. Its features were slightly pale, yet there was something unnerving about the color of the skin, almost like a shade of gray, tinged with something unnatural. His hand hovered over the file. Next to the body, the case file containing the meager details. It was thin, too thin for a death of this apparent mystery. Just a simple report from the local sheriff's office, detailing the discovery of the body by the hiker, and a few notes on the lack of any obvious signs of trauma. David snapped the file shut, frustrated. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong here, that something was hiding beneath the surface of this case. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the morgue door, and Dr. Rachel Davis, the night shift nurse, stepped in. "David, you okay?" she asked, eyeing with concern. "Yeah, just something about this one doesn't sit right," David replied, rubbing his temples. "I can't explain it, but I feel like I'm missing something." Rachel glanced down at the body. "It's unsettling, I'll give you that. The fact that there's no ID, no sign of trauma. And then there's those teeth." David nodded grimly. "Right. I've never seen anything like it. They don't match any dental records, not even the rare cases we've had in the database." Rachel pursed her lips. "Do you think it's something to do with the local cults? You know, the ones that have been popping up around here?" David shook his head. He had heard the rumors, but they were just that, rumors. The idea of strange rituals or occult practices didn't seem to fit the case. Still, there was something about the body that made him feel like he was being drawn into something far darker than he could imagine. David sighed, his hands instinctively adjusting the lights in the room. It was late, and he had to focus. The body had been here for hours, and he couldn't afford to waste any more time on distractions. Rachel left a quiet word of encouragement, and David was alone again, staring at the body, which seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. As he set the lights on a dimmer to prepare for the autopsy, something strange happened. The lights flickered, then went out completely. For a moment, there was only darkness. David's heart raced in the pitch blackness. He wasn't sure what had happened, whether the power had simply gone out, or if something more sinister was at work. His eyes adjusted to the faint glow coming from the street lights outside, barely illuminating the morgue. He reached for his phone, intending to call maintenance, but as his hand brushed the desk, he froze. A cold chill ran up his spine. The body, the corpse, had moved. At first, it was so subtle. David almost thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, there it was. The arm that had been resting lifeless at the side of the table was now bent slightly. The hand, once open and relaxed, was now gripping the edge of the table with a deathly firmness. David's breath caught in his throat. He was sure he had seen the body just moments ago, perfectly still. Had it shifted during the flicker of the lights? Or had it always been like this, and he hadn't noticed? His pulse quickened as he stepped closer, warily eyeing the body. He reached out hesitant, but before he could touch it, the lights flickered again, then came back on, bright and steady. And the body was back in its original position, completely still. David stood frozen for a moment, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up as he processed what had just happened. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the long hours, or perhaps he was simply overworked, but that moment in the dark had left him unsettled. He took a step back, rubbing his hands together to shake off the sudden chill. This case had just become more than strange. It had become personal. Dr. David Sloan couldn't shake the unnerving feeling from a night before. The body was lying there in the morgue, and no matter how many times he ran through the steps in his mind, he couldn't find a reasonable explanation for what he had seen. The way the body had shifted, or rather moved, was not something he had ever encountered in his years as a medical examiner. It felt as if the corpse was alive, or at the very least, aware. He glanced over at the morgue's phone, still in its charging cradle, hoping the night's odd occurrence was nothing more than fatigue. The lights had gone out once more, and the body had shifted position during the brief seconds of darkness. He hadn't imagined it, had he? He ran his fingers over his stubble, sighing deeply as he got ready to start the autopsy. David wasn't a superstitious man. He had seen enough death and decay to last a lifetime, and he had learned to detach himself from the horrors of profession required him to witness. But this body, this thing, seemed different. The corpse on the table was unmarked. No obvious wounds or signs of trauma. Not even the usual bruising or lacerations that came with some deaths. There was nothing about it that screamed foul play, except for the unnerving feeling that it wasn't entirely human. The strange, alien teeth and the odd pale hue of the skin stood out like sore thumbs. David steadied himself, gripping the scalpel in his hand, but even the cold steel of the blade couldn't calm his nerves. He glanced over at the clock. It was nearing midnight. The morgue was completely silent, save for the faint hum of the fridge that kept the bodies preserved. It was a rhythm that David had grown accustomed to, but tonight the stillness felt suffocating. "Let's get this over with," he muttered to himself as he positioned himself next to the table. He began by making the standard incision, slicing through the chest to open the body. The The skin parted easily under the blade, and David moved quickly, his hands methodical and trained. But as he worked, a strange feeling washed over him, like a presence was standing behind him, watching his every move. He paused, raising his head. The room was empty, the faint glow from the streetlights outside casting shadows on the walls. But the feeling remained, gnawing at him, growing stronger by the second. David shook it off, telling himself it was just his imagination running wild. The autopsy had to continue. His hands hovered above the corpse's chest, steadying himself before plunging the scalpel into the rib cage. He was about to make the final cut when something unexpected happened. A loud, ear-piercing crack echoed through the room. David's heart skipped a beat as the sound rattled in his chest. The body's chest had moved. It was subtle at first, a slight expansion, almost as if the corpse was inhaling. David's eyes went wide as he backed away from the table, dropping the scalpel in disbelief. The chest of the body had risen ever so slightly, as though it were breathing. It was an impossible, horrifying thing to witness. His pulse raced as he steadied himself against the table. No, this isn't happening. It's just a trick of the light or a hallucination. David quickly turned to the lights, flipping the switch and plunging the room into complete darkness once again. He stood still, listening intently to the silence that hung in the air. The lights flickered and hummed as they struggled to turn back on. As they did, David's eyes darted back to the body. The chest had sunk back down. It was once again lifeless, as if nothing had happened. He blinked a few times, unsure if he had imagined the whole thing. He reached for the body, touching the skin with a trembling hand. It was cold, just as it had been before. But deep down, David knew he hadn't imagined it. He backed away slowly, his head spinning. This wasn't just some strange case. This was something else entirely. He needed a second opinion. David grabbed his phone and dialed Rachel, but the line went straight to voicemail. He cursed under his breath and decided to call the hospital's night shift nurse. He tried her, but there was no answer. Frustrated, he stood there in the dim glow of the morgue's lights, trying to make sense of what was happening. The body was still on the table, its posture eerily still, as if nothing had ever happened. But David could feel it, a quiet, looming threat in the air. Something was terribly wrong, and he didn't know where to begin searching for the truth. He ran his fingers through his hair, taking a deep breath as he stared at the corpse. It was almost like the body was waiting for him to do something, like it was demanding to be opened. But there was no way he could perform the autopsy in this condition, not with that unsettling feeling creeping up on him like a shadow. It wasn't just the body that was unnerving. It was everything surrounding it. The way the morgue felt colder than usual, the sensation that he wasn't truly alone in the room. It all pointed to something dark, something sinister. But David wasn't one to back down. He had seen it all, the worst of the worst. He had stared death in the face more times than he could count. But now, he felt as if he was being pulled into something that he might not be able to escape. The air in the morgue felt thick, suffocating, as if something was pressing down on David's chest. He had spent the past several hours walking in circles, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. The strange movements of the body, the whispering darkness, the odd sensation of being watched. It was all becoming too much to handle. But the most disturbing part was the silence that filled the morgue like a living entity, suffocating him, swallowing him whole. He had called Rachel again and again, but she hadn't answered. The line went straight to voicemail each time. There was no one he could trust in this moment, no one to back him up. It was just him, the body, and whatever was watching him from the shadows. David stood still in the dim glow of the morgue lights, staring at the table where the body lay. It looked so innocent, so still, but there was something fundamentally wrong with it. He could feel it in his bones. The body wasn't just dead, it was waiting for something, waiting for him. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, a constant reminder of the time passing by. As if mocking him, he wiped his hand across his forehead, trying to steady his breath. But it was hard to think clearly with the weight of everything pressing down on him. What was this? What was happening? David turned his gaze back to the body. He knew what he had to do. He had to finish the autopsy. There was no turning back now. He took slow, measured steps toward the table, his hands shaking as he picked up the scalpel. The blade was cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth in his palm. He felt the weight of it, the finality of it. He had to open the body, to find the answers to all the questions that had been swirling in his mind since the moment he had seen the corpse. But as he leaned over the body, the lights flickered again, once, twice, and then the entire room plunged into darkness. David froze, his breath caught in his throat as the darkness swallowed him whole. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and a cold chill ran down his spine. He had been expecting it, but now that it was happening, he wasn't sure if he was ready. The silence was deafening. It felt as though the very walls of the morgue were closing in on him. He tried to breathe, but the air felt thick and heavy, as if the room itself was alive, pulsating with some unseen energy. He gripped the scalpel tighter, his knuckles turning white. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone dark, the lights flickered back on. David's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding in his chest. He stared at the table. The body had moved again. This time, it wasn't subtle. The body was no longer lying flat on its back. The arms were now bent at the elbows, hands resting at the side of its face. The head had tilted slightly to the left, as if it were observing him, studying him, watching him. David's blood ran cold. He couldn't process what he was seeing. This was impossible. This wasn't just the body of a dead person. It was something else, something alive, something that had crossed a line between death and something else entirely. His breathing quickened, and he stumbled backward, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the impossible. It wasn't possible. The body had been perfectly still just moments ago. There was no way it could have moved, no way it could be alive. But David knew deep down that it was. And the worst part? He wasn't alone. The air around him grew colder, and he could feel something brush against the back of his neck. It was a whisper, soft and barely audible, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through him. He turned sharply, but the room was empty, just the sterile metal tables, the shadows cast by the fluorescent lights, and the oppressive silence that hung in the air. David's eyes darted back to the table, and to his horror, the body had shifted again. It was sitting up now, its limbs moving unnaturally, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. The jaw opened slightly, a low, rasping sound emanating from its throat. It wasn't a moan or a groan. It was something far worse. It was as if the corpse was trying to speak, to communicate in a language no human ear should ever hear. David stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. His legs were shaking, unable to support his weight. He reached for his phone, but as he did, the lights flickered again, and once more, the moor was plunged into darkness. The whispering grew louder, more frantic. It was everywhere, around him, beneath him, in his ears, in his skull. The corpse on the table began to twitch violently. Its hands clawed at the air as if it were trying to break free from something. David wanted to run. He needed to run, but he couldn't. His legs wouldn't move. His feet were glued to the floor, his body frozen in terror as the darkness swallowed him whole. And then the lights flickered one last time, revealing something he couldn't unsee. Standing at the edge of the room was a figure, tall, thin, and shrouded in darkness. It had no face, just an empty void where the features should have been. Its hands reached out, long, skeletal fingers stretching toward David, beckoning him closer. David's breath caught in his throat as he tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His mind was racing, his body on the edge of panic. The figure took another step toward him, and then the lights went out again. Story 5. The House That Screams at 3:15. It was the kind of morning that crept in slowly, the air still thick with fog, heavy with moisture. For Sarah Davis, a seasoned real estate agent working in upstate New York, it had started like any other day. She had a showing schedule for the old Victorian mansion, an imposing, almost otherworldly structure nestled on the edge of a forgotten street. She'd been trying to sell the house for months, but despite its beauty, there was something off about it that made potential buyers hesitate. The house had history. It was a fact that Sarah didn't like to dwell on, but it was something everyone in the town talked about. Built in the late 1800s, it was rumored to have been the scene of several disappearances, all of which had never been solved. The whispers in the town spoke of a dark presence that lingered within the walls, a presence that didn't let go. She didn't believe in such things. After all, she was a professional, a woman of logic and reason. She just needed to sell the house and move on. But that was before her first showing at 3:15 a.m. She had been there just a few days ago to prep for the new buyers, a young couple who seemed eager to purchase, despite the house's age and its growing reputation. She had left around midnight, feeling the weight of the looming task ahead, but confident that this was the day she would finally get rid of it. The thought of the property hanging over her like a shadow had drained her, but there was no turning back. That was until the call came in. At 3:15 a.m., Sarah received an unexpected call from her office. It was her boss, David, his voice shaking with panic, barely able to get the words out. "Sarah," he gasped, "the couple, the buyers who were going to close, they've disappeared. No sign of them. We can't find them anywhere." Her heart dropped, the phone slipping slightly in her grasp. The details were sparse, but she could hear the panic in his voice. "How do you mean disappeared?" "They were in the house, Sarah. They were supposed to meet you at 2 a.m. I thought they were just running late. But then the neighbors heard screaming. They vanished. The house, it's happening again." Her mind raced, confusion and fear swirling within her. Vanishing? No one vanished anymore. Not like that. Yet David's trembling voice on the other end of the line held a truth she couldn't ignore. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The line went dead, and Sarah knew she had to go back. She had to see for herself. She drove back to the mansion in the dead of night, the road silent, eerie in their emptiness. The once grand house loomed ahead, its gothic silhouette standing out starkly against the moonlit sky. The shutters creaked, and the trees surrounding the mansion swayed unnaturally, as though they were alive and watching her approach. Sarah parked her car and stepped out, her breath visible in the cold night air. The front door of the house stood slightly ajar, an invitation or a warning. She couldn't tell. She hesitated before stepping inside, but duty and something darker pulled her toward the threshold. Inside, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The air was still, too still, as though something was waiting for her, watching her every move. Sarah moved slowly to the front hallway, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The house seemed to shift, its presence growing more palpable as she walked deeper into its bowels. The old hardwood floors creaked beneath her, the walls whispering as if the very house were trying to communicate. She shook her head, telling herself that it was just her nerves. She needed to focus. She was here to figure out what had happened to the couple, to uncover the truth. She couldn't let herself get swept up in stories of ghosts and disappearances. But as Sarah stepped into the main living room, a chill ran through her body. The room was bathed in a soft, almost ethereal glow, though there was no light source. And then she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible but distinct. "Sarah, Sarah." Her name echoed through the room, carried on the windless air. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she spun around, her pulse quickening. The room was empty. No one was there, no one at all. Yet the whisper continued, growing louder, coming from every corner, from inside the very walls of the house. "Sarah." The name was soft but insistent, as if the house itself was calling to her, beckoning her forward. She clenched her fists and stepped back, her heart racing. She knew she should leave, but something deep inside her told her that she couldn't. The whisper grew louder still, louder than anything she had ever heard. Your son? Sarah, your son. Her blood ran cold at the mention of her son, Daniel, who was at home with his grandmother. She hadn't spoken to him in hours, and the thought of something happening to him made her stomach twist. Her breath became shallow as she turned to leave. But then the clock in the foyer chimed. It was 3:15 a.m., the exact time when everything went wrong. The moment when, according to every buyer who had come before, something terrible had happened. The whispering stopped abruptly, and in that moment of eerie silence, Sarah felt it, something sharp, a presence in the air, pressing down on her. The floor beneath her creaked loudly. She froze. She looked up, and there was a shadow, not human, moving in the corner of the room. Its shape was shifting, growing, expanding. It wasn't just a shadow. It was something darker, something far worse. And then a piercing scream echoed to the house, a scream so loud, so filled with terror, it made Sarah's bones rattle. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she rushed to the front door. But as she did, the air shifted, heavy and thick. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping her inside. The whisper returned, louder now, swirling around her, and through the fog of sound, she heard it again. Your son, this is Mr. Darsnight's, and tonight you return to a house that doesn't just haunt, it chooses. If you're hearing your name in the walls, it's already too late. Welcome back to the house that screams at 3:15. The silence following the scream was more terrifying than the scream itself. Sarah stood frozen in the foyer, her back pressed against the now-locked front door. Her pulse pounded in her ears, and she could feel sweat trickle down the back of her neck despite the biting cold. She reached for her phone, hands trembling. No signal. Of course not. It was the same thing every time, the same pattern. The house lured them in, closed the door behind them, and watched. She tried to collect herself, forcing deep breaths, though the air felt like breathing through gauze, thick, heavy, almost alive. A deep hum pulsed through the walls. Just a house, she whispered, try to reclaim some sense of sanity. With brick, dust, just a house. But even she didn't believe that anymore. She stepped into the living room again, drawn to the large fireplace where a picture frame sat, covered in dust. She wiped it clean. It was a photo of a child, a boy, around Daniel's age. Her throat tightened, the same piercing blue eyes, same mop of dark hair. But it wasn't just a resemblance that unsettled her. It was the date at the bottom, scratched in the corner in what looked like a child's handwriting. Jeremy, 1993. He said the house liked me. Sarah backed away from the photo, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. She turned to the staircase. The upper floor was darker than the rest of the house, as if light dared not enter. She didn't want to go up there, but she had to. As she climbed, the steps groaned beneath her feet. The air grew colder, heavier, more hostile. Each step felt like walking deeper into a dream she couldn't wake from. The house didn't just creak, it sighed, as though exhaling something ancient and tired. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched in both directions. Doors lined the corridor, each one slightly ajar. Faint murmurs filtered through the wood, indistinct, childlike whispers, as if a game of hide and seek was still in progress. One door, at the very end, was wide open. A soft yellow light spilled into the hallway from inside. She stepped closer. With each footfall, the murmuring stopped, the silence stretching like elastic. Her hand touched the doorframe. Inside was a nursery. A crib sat in the center, rocking gently. No wind, No movement, just a slow creak of wood. Sarah stepped inside. Toys lay scattered across the floor. Antique, faded with time. A mobile spun lazily above the crib, though the air was still. She looked inside, dreading what she might find. But the crib was empty, except for one thing, a cassette tape. She picked it up. A sticky note was attached. 3:15, play me. Against every ounce of common sense, she reached into her bag for the small digital recorder she carried for work, popped in the tape, and pressed play. Static, then a voice. Her voice. He's mine. You can't have him. A crash, screaming. More static, then a child's voice. Mommy? She dropped the recorder. Her heart thundered in her chest. That voice! She knew that voice. It wasn't her imagination. It was Daniel. Her son's voice was on the tape. But how? And then the lights blew out. All of them. Darkness swallowed her whole. The nursery, the hallway, the entire house. Sarah scrambled to the door, but it slammed shut before she reached it. Her screams echoed through the room, but no one answered. And then the screaming started again. But this time it wasn't hers. It came from below, from the basement, slow, dragging, like something ancient was pulling itself through the earth. And suddenly, the door creaked open behind her. Sarah ran. She sprinted back down the hallway, down the stairs, breath ragged, panic drowning her senses. When she reached the bottom, the smell hit her, something foul, rotting, like wet soil mixed with burning hair. The basement door was open. She should have turned and run, but her son's voice echoed again. Mommy, come get me. And she couldn't ignore it. Down into the dark she went. The basement steps were slick, damp. A single hanging bulb flickered at the base, casting long shadows that didn't match her movements. The walls were lined with old newspaper clippings, hundreds of them, each one detailing missing persons, grisly murders, unexplained vanishings. At the center of the room, a circle of salt surrounded a chair. In that chair, something sat. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't speak. The thing in the chair looked like a person, at first, but its proportions were wrong. Too long, skin too thin, eyes too wide. It smiled. You're finally here, it said. Its voice was her own. You brought him with you, didn't you? She shook her head violently. No, he's safe. He's not here. But the creature only smiled wider. Oh, Sarah, he's always been here. The house likes him. Behind her, the basement door slammed shut. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. 3:15 a.m. Your son is home alone. Then the power surged, and the bulb above exploded in a rain of glass and sparks. She dropped the phone, heart clawing at her chest. From the shadows, the voice whispered again, but not for long. Darkness swallowed Sarah whole. The air in the basement was thick like syrup, pressing against her chest with each step. The shadows clung to her skin, whispering words she couldn't quite understand. But she didn't need to understand them. She knew what they wanted. Her son. She stumbled backward, fumbling in the pitch black, her breaths coming in short gasps. The walls seemed to pulse around her, alive with some unknowable force. The circle of salt around the chair had been broken now, smeared into the dirt floor. Whatever sat in the chair had risen, and it was no longer sitting. Sarah, the voice slithered from every corner of the room. Did you think you were the first? A series of flickers lit up the far wall. Photos, hundreds of them. Children, smiling, innocent. Their eyes had all been scratched out with what looked like nails. In every photo, the same house loomed in the background. The Victorian mansion, the one Sarah had been trying to sell. The one she now understood was never meant to be sold. The house wasn't for people. It was for them. From behind her, something moved. A sound, like wet cloth dragging across wood. She turned around and saw nothing, but something was close. So close she could smell it. Earthy, rotten, like graves opened too soon. She ran, bolting up the basement stairs. They bent under her feet, threatening to collapse. At the top, she reached the knob. It was gone. The doorknob was gone. No handle, no way out. The door melted into the wall. like it had never existed. The house had sealed her in. And then her phone rang. Her heart nearly stopped. She pulled it from her coat pocket. The screen glitched, flickering between static and the camera. It had turned on by itself. There was a video playing. Her living room. But it wasn't live. Daniel sat alone on the couch, clutching his teddy bear. And behind him, standing just in the corner of the frame, was a figure. Not a man. Not a shadow. Something inhuman. Its head was bent too far forward. Its limbs too long. Its mouth hung open as if in an endless, soundless scream. It wasn't moving, but it was getting closer with every second of footage. Closer. Closer, closer. The video cut. Her phone died. No, she whispered. No, 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 no. Then the door behind her opened on its own. She didn't hesitate. Sarah sprinted through the hall, the whispers turning to screams. Each picture on the wall melted as she passed. Portrait of past victims, their faces stretching into grotesque masks as if warning her. She shoved open the front door. This time it let her leave. Outside, the morning sun had begun to rise, but it brought no warmth. She jumped in her car, engine roaring to life. Her only thought was of Daniel. She had to get home. She didn't see the woman in the second-floor window watching her go. She didn't see the blood dripping from her fingernails. When Sarah arrived, the house was quiet. Too quiet. She burst through the front door. Daniel. No response. She ran to his room. Empty. The covers were thrown back. The teddy bear was gone. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. She had escaped the house, but it had taken what it wanted. Her phone buzzed. No caller ID. She hesitated, then answered, and heard her own voice. He's mine now. She dropped the phone, but it didn't stop ringing. It never stopped ringing. A week later, Sarah was found wandering down Route 9 barefoot, in the middle of the night. She had no memory of how she got there, no memory of her name, only a single phrase repeated under her breath. He screams at 3:15. The Victorian mansion still sits on its lonely hill. The listing remains active, but no one responds to calls anymore. And every night, just before clock strikes 3:15, the local sheriff's office gets an anonymous voicemail. A child's voice, barely a whisper. Mommy, please come get me. You've been listening to another tale from the shadows with Mr. Darsnights. If this story chilled your spine, leave a like, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights on, and subscribe for more true crime horror that never lets you rest. Until next time, remember, not all screams are heard, especially at 3:15. Good night.